for joining me. We have Danie from Nichols Family Lawyers today.
Oh, thank you for having me, Jodie. It's fantastic to be here.
Yeah. So, a couple of weeks ago, you did a talk at one of our networking events about gifts and...
Gifts, loans, and everything in between.
Yeah.
And essentially what that is about is it's primarily focused around the bank of mum and dad and first home buyers.
Yeah.
So especially, those who are, in their early 20s, sort of up to, even the early 30s, who want to move out of home, or, they might be single or, partnered, and they can't afford to buy first house. And it's quite common these days, as you would know, of course.
Yeah.
And they think, well, maybe if I go to mum and dad, they might be able to assist.
Yeah.
And I'm sure it's quite common with you. You get that all the time.
Yeah, which is why I reached out to do this chat. Is we love working with first home buyers. And we work with a lot in the mid-20s to mid-30s and everything in between. And we often get gifts or guarantors.
And we see it all the time.
Yeah.
And I mean, look, guarantors, it is quite common, especially, within family law proceedings, they might say, and we're talking, it's not too common with, much older clients, but, some, for example, might say, look, when I bought my first property, mum and dad went as guarantor. Within a family law proceeding, it is quite risky being a guarantor, especially if there is a breakdown of, say, de facto relationship or a marriage, because then what if one party then stops paying the mortgage, for example, or if both parties are unable to afford to pay the mortgage, then it falls back on, well, mum and dad.
Yeah.
So you've got to be very careful, especially, look, different story if, say, one party's going to keep it and their parents are the guarantors and they'll just continually repay the mortgage, that's fine. But, you don't want to be in that sort of situation. That's why it is a good idea, if mum and dad want to help out, do it as a gift or as a loan. And I'm sure, you've come across, yes, mum and dad are going to give me, $500,000 to, put towards the first house. But you've got to be very careful, especially the way it's documented. Because a lot of people, and I see it it's quite common, where you might just whip up a loan agreement just to say, and it's not really a loan, and I'm quoting it, but it's not really a loan. But what a lot of people will do is they'll say, look, we'll give you $500,000, and in the actual loan agreement, there's no real repayments. There's a clause in there to say, upon the breakdown of a marriage, we get the money back. And that's it. So, you see people in 30-year relationships or marriages where, all right, it's broken down. Oh, mum and dad have now come out of the woodwork, want their money back. There's a lot you have to go through. If it's a legitimate loan agreement and there's actual repayments being made, a bit of a different story. Mum and dad will most likely be repaid anyway. But you've got to be very, very careful. If it's a fake loan agreement, it's more a gift, but more so for, or just in case they break up, we want our money back, but the other party's going to get it back anyway. Be very, very careful about it, because the court would look at it to say, well, it's not a proper loan agreement. It will be seen as a contribution from the other party. Yep, mum and dad gave you $500,000. There were no repayments. There's no interest payable as well. That's the other thing is, you got to consider. So they'll say, all right, it's a large contribution on behalf of one party from mum and dad.
So, what would you suggest that parents do to protect themselves? See a lawyer first, or just have that open conversation?
Well, one thing, you got to have a bit of an open conversation with your child, and I'm only saying that because one of the most important documents is a binding financial agreement. And I mean, the parents don't have any involvement in that, but the kids do. So, for example, mum and dad might have a chat with their son or daughter. They might say, look, we want to give you money. We're, cautious. I'm not saying, we're going to divorce, you're not going to divorce or anything like that. More so, we're a bit cautious. we want to give you the money. What happens worst case scenario? When are we going to see it again?
Yeah.
So they might say, look, we'll give you the money, have a chat with your partner, see, you know, if they're willing to enter into a financial agreement.
Yeah.
And a lot of people do.
Yeah.
Because they say, well, we're not, if they know, okay, we're not going to break up, there's not going to be any sort of separation, then, well, you're going to be having the benefit of it.
Yeah.
That's, you know, sort of the way a lot of people see it. So at least then you can be protected, even if it's a gift, for example. You know, you could say, look, they're going to purchase a property, say, you know, in Coburg. The property's worth $1 million. Mum and dad are giving a gift of $500,000, but in the financial agreement, that party's going to be keeping the house.
Yeah.
So that's the way you would structure it, even if it's a gift or a loan, but you'll be documented in a financial agreement for protection purposes.
Yeah.
And look, there might be, for example, other ways you can go about it. So, you know, it's not just going to be for a lot of couples, just the one house that they're going to have. They might go and buy another house down the track in joint names.
Yes.
So if they want to take out some equity in the first property, for example, which is common, and they want to move it into the joint property, there'd be a provision, and you know, we're quite careful when we're drafting our financial agreements to include a provision to say, well, if you're going to go buy a house, then any lump sum payments from the first house to the second house be repaid, for example, and we might put a provision in there to say, and it'd be, you know, get some bank statements and things like that to calculate, all right, well, how much money got taken out of that, and if the joint property needs to be sold, you know, that is first priority after, you know, say any mortgage repayments and things like that, and sale cost commissions, the lump sum payments go straight back first. Yep. So that's another way you can also protect the first property.
Yeah. And you can help with these financial agreements?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So definitely can help. One of my specialty areas is financial agreements. So, you know, and we're, you know, especially if it's the bank of mum and dad getting involved and, you know, they want that sort of protection. Yes. It is good to have, you know, a BFA set up, and, you know, you can do it a BFA at any time. So, you know, even if the parties are married at the moment, they can enter into one prior to the marriage as well, or, you know, prior or during a de facto relationship. Yeah. They can definitely enter into an agreement, and especially if they want, you know, it's more so for mum and dad, just so, because, you know, a lot of parents don't feel comfortable giving their kids money if they're thinking at the end of the day, oh God, you know, am I ever going to see that money again? Yeah. Because as I said, if there's no agreement in place, the court will see it as, well, it's a contribution made. If it was, you know, $500,000, $1 million, you know, you get a bit more credit, essentially. But, you know, mum and dad won't see that money again.
Yeah. And how long does it take to get a financial agreement put in place?
Oh, we can do it within a few weeks. Okay. One can be drafted up. Yep. Both parties for a financial agreement will need lawyers. Yes. Because they will also need their independent legal advice, which explains the advantages and the disadvantages of entering into the agreement. With the financial agreement, both parties must also, you know, disclose any, so, you know, assets, liabilities. There must be an exchange of financial disclosure, so, you know, bank account statements, superannuation, just to determine, well, what's each party's position going in to this agreement, which is quite important. And a lot of people don't understand the importance of disclosure, because, you know, you have some instances where there wasn't any disclosure exchanged, and then they're put into a position where, oh, well, you know, there was no disclosure. Is this agreement binding? So you've got to be very, very careful with your disclosure obligations as well. Yeah.
And a lot of lenders, when there's parent guarantors, want that independent legal advice as well, which is a part of the lending anyway.
Absolutely.
So doing that step backwards of getting a financial agreement is probably really beneficial.
It's beneficial to mum and dad.
Yeah, of course.
So at least they know, all right, look, worst case scenario, in 20 years' time, if they separate, at least I know where the money is. Yes. And look, I know a lot of people as well, and again, going back to the financial agreements, where, you know, what if, you know, the first property that I buy when mum and dad helped out is sold?
Yeah.
And then that money then goes into, say, another sole property or another joint property, would make sure there are provisions in the agreement to make sure that anywhere the money goes, it will always go back to at least that party.
Yeah. Yeah.
So at least, mum and dad can,
Rest easy.
Rest easy. They know where, say the 500 grand's going.
Yeah.
And they know, all right, well, it's going to be with our child at the end of the day. It'll go everywhere, but at least we know at the end of the day it's going to go back to them.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Which is what we work for. I'm a mum, and I would definitely, that's something we would definitely think of. My kids aren't at that age yet, but one day they will be.
But a lot of people do.
Yeah.
And it is a struggle, and I'm sure you can go through as well. The struggle that first home owner or buyers will need to, what they need to do, what they need to go through, and mum and dad helping out is just so common these days. So it's quite important if mum and dad want to help out. Definitely, have the discussion first, because you don't want to make things awkward either.
Yeah. I think having those conversations with the child first, and then the whole family, I think is really, really important, and then seeking legal advice.
Well, exactly right. Because there have been instances where one party will say, "Oh, look, let's enter into one," and the other party might say, "Well, no, I'm never signing a financial agreement." But then mum and dad then need to think, well, do we risk it, give them the money, or do we say, nah, sorry, not going to give it to you then?
Yeah.
Which is quite risky.
Yes.
Because then, well, how else are kids going to buy properties?
Yeah.
Unless because again, prices for properties at this stage are they're skyrocketing by the minute. And they just simply won't be able to ever afford it.
Yeah, especially if you're in the pocket where you possibly grew up and you want to stay closer to the family, for that family network, and as children come in.
A lot of people do.
Yeah,
and
course,
they want to be nearby mum and dad.
Yes.
And I'm in the same boat. Anything to be living near where mum and dad are. But it's not like I've got a spare couple of million sitting on the side there to move towards the beach. But it's definitely something that people need to consider.
Yes.
More so for protection purposes, but also, well, if you want to sort of be near mum and dad and you want their help, then maybe the financial agreement's the way to go.
Yeah.
And you shouldn't be thinking, oh my god, a financial agreement. It's a legal document, but at the end of the day, if there's no intention to separate, then the agreement's sort of just sitting there on the side. You don't need to worry about it. There's never going to be any sort of discussion. It's your worst case scenario.
Yeah.
So and a lot of people think, oh, well, you're thinking we're going to be, we're going to separate, and no, that's not the case.
Yeah.
It's more so of a worst case scenario. So people shouldn't be having that mentality when they're thinking of financial agreements either.
Yeah. What about singles? We do get a lot of singles who buy as first home buyers with help.
Yeah.
Is that still beneficial, given that they're buying on their own? They may have a partner in the background but they're not de facto.
They're nothing. So like we're just a normal sort of your stock standard relationship, boyfriend, girlfriend.
Yeah.
Look, that's fine, but it might come to the point where you can sort of go different avenues. You can still get a financial agreement to say, oh, look, before we get a bit serious or before we get married, look, I feel comfortable if you sign an agreement, or so, I mean, a lot of the time, and we've found that if there's no agreement in place, and say you go through the proceedings and everything else, I mean, you would keep that property anyway if it's still in existence. There would be an acknowledgement that mum and dad have put 500,000, 600,000 into this property, which you had prior to the relationship.
Yeah.
So what would then generally happen is there'd be a contribution argument with respect to that, but then there will also be another set of arguments to say, well, all right, seeing as we're going to be keeping this property, there's the contribution argument. The other party might get more from the other assets as opposed to what mum and dad have put in.
Yeah. And
I've had matters where mum and dad have put in more money than what's available. And that's in a short relationship, that's very important. In a 30-year one, it's a bit different. So, you know, you can't just say, oh, look, this property that your parents helped you from 30 years ago, it's so minimal compared to after a long 30-year marriage. Yeah, but no, definitely something to consider if you're coming in with property. But the court takes that factor into consideration to say, oh, well, you know, they came in with a $1 million unencumbered property with the help of mum and dad. So that gets taken into consideration too.
Yeah. All right, well, thank you so much. I'll post your details on the information below. So, but I love having you part of my network.
No, thank you. And thank you again for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure. And stay tuned for the next one.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.